Hello, happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Cobblestone Freeway Tours interview. We are very honored today to have a special guest, former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine, Pan Roman Waschuk, joining us. Pan Roman, welcome to our little program. How are you doing today?
Doing fine. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, it's been a long time coming. We've chatted about this for a while,
Hmm.
getting you on here. Now that you've retired from politics and the foreign service, and you're enjoying life, you can reflect peacefully on your time in Ukraine and the interesting things that you saw. And I know that Ukraine is such an interesting country, and you probably have all kinds of insights into what people think about Ukraine, what people don't know about Ukraine, and I thought this would be a great way to talk about that. So let me start off by asking you, what is it about Ukraine that people don't know that you think they should know?
I think that Canadians have many Canadians have a heritage relationship to Ukraine, but we're also deeply influenced by the North American environment we live in. So,
Yes.
for example, most people in Canada and the States assume that all European countries are pretty tiny, and
Uh-huh.
Ukraine is not. It is the largest country entirely in Europe.
Yes.
Uh, and it's about 1,400 kilometers wide. So something that's happening at one end, and let's face it, there is a kind of low-level conflict happening in the Donbass,
Yes.
doesn't have a direct effect on what's happening in the other. So the assumption is that if I saw something uh, on TV, then the whole country consists of a bunch of smoldering ruins, is kind of
Misleading.
inaccurate.
Yeah.
Ditto, in the same way as people don't avoid all of Pennsylvania because 3 Mile Island happened at some point
Right.
in the late 70s. All of Ukraine is not a Chernobyl memorial. Yes, Chernobyl,
Right.
it's a place and people visit it, and Canadians, through their taxes, have contributed to making it a whole bunch safer. But it again is not the whole country.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I meet a lot of people that are very concerned about some of the issues in Ukraine. But like you mentioned when we were chatting earlier, people don't avoid Italy for some of the reasons that they may avoid Ukraine. And so you think that's because of the personal attachment to Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, personal attachment to Ukraine is a very powerful thing for a lot of people, and it has
Hmm.
huge benefits culturally. But it can kind of slant your view of things.
Hmm.
Now, I think she isn't watching, so maybe I'm allowed to say this. My mother um, is has been constantly annoyed when she visits Ukraine because she has a certain idea of what the country should be like, could be
Right.
like, and I think she's largely right in what she'd like to see. But she's really annoyed when it doesn't live up to expectations.
There's a lot of
On the
myths.
other hand, we lived for 3 years in Belgrade, and Serbia and the countries around aren't that different from Ukraine in terms of how
But
things
she loved
work or
it?
don't work. And she visited us. She was perfectly happy to visit those places,
Yes.
but no emotional predisposition uh, to want the countries to change themselves rapidly in a better direction.
I've had
So on
that
the one hand, that's a
experience.
powerful force, but
Yes.
sometimes you need to put it on hold to just enjoy what's out there.
I've had that experience with a group of tourists. We were in Odessa, and we had a great time. And I said to someone, "How did you enjoy Odessa?" They said, "I hated it." I said, "Why?" "Because they speak Russian there." And I said, "Okay, but you you've been to lots of other places in the world that don't speak Ukrainian, and you enjoyed yourself fine." But you're right. It's all about that preconceived expectation of what Ukraine should be in the mind.
And again, because Ukraine's geographically big and has had a very varied history, it's got uh, different facets.
Hmm.
Some scholars have talked about, are there two Ukraines? I think one professor, Hitsaku, I like, said no, there are actually 25 Ukraines.
Yeah,
Each
that's more
region
true.
is quite different. Um, I think maybe a lot of people have been out there buying Oля Hercules's cookbooks,
Yes.
starting with Mamushka, and now I think probably the most comprehensive one, Summer Kitchen.
Yes.
And
they're very
you
popular.
can see that her Ukraine is a kind of semi-Mediterranean Ukraine. It's a Ukraine that's full of red peppers and eggplants and things, and not so much potatoes and cabbage.
Right.
She comes from Kakhovka in the heart of Kherson Oblast, southern Ukraine.
Right.
Black Sea, connected to Turkey, connected to the Mediterranean. And, partly by going to different parts of the country, you can put yourself in the place of the people there and realize that there are different ways of looking at it and different ways of sort of being in that country, which are fun. And in the case of stuff from her cookbooks, tasty
for sure. Now, like you mentioned, Ukraine is the largest country in Europe, but yet it receives statistically the least amount of tourists relative to any other country in Europe. I mean, in size compared to Ireland or to Hungary, Ukraine is huge, but gets absolutely the least amount of tourists in all of Europe. Do you think that's going to change over the next little while?
I think it already has been changing, and you've seen certain cities become tourist magnets, both for foreigners when they're allowed into the country, such as this year, of course, has been quite exceptional,
yes.
and for Ukrainians themselves. So part of it's been Ukrainians who've traditionally thought that travel happens somewhere else.
Right.
Ever since they were able to travel outside after the Soviet period, I think maybe for them a period of being forced to travel in groups around the country in the Soviet period developed a kind of reaction against that sort of thing.
Right. Yes.
And so you then go anywhere else. What they've realized after 2014, when there was an increased sense of pride, but also a currency collapse that meant that it was more affordable to travel within Ukraine, is that there are lots of things that you can see inside the country. And frankly, one of my younger relatives in Lviv said, really, I can have pretty much anything I want, sort of Vienna-ish stuff in Lviv at about 1/5 the price.
Absolutely. Well, Lviv has really embraced their Austro-Hungarian cultural history and really turned that into a tourism magnet.
And I mean, to the extent that some residents are going, wait a minute, too many tourists. So they're not thinking too few, they're thinking too many. But it's because the mayor there, now almost 15 years ago, made a conscious decision that tourism and later IT are going to be the backbone of the economic development strategy for the city. And so
absolutely,
I think the other big change that's happened since the 90s, when Canadians maybe first ventured into Ukraine and sometimes had issues with infrastructure, hygiene, and a number of other things going on, is that you've had the Ukrainian private entrepreneurs moving in and providing the nice hotels, from bigger ones to boutique hotels to cafes to attractions to visit, all that, which wasn't there 25, 30 years ago.
And that history still lingers a little bit about that. There's not enough toilet paper, there's no food, the water, you can't get a cold beer, that kind of stuff still.
Yeah, as we now discovered, as we look at social media, bad news travels, excitingly fake news travels, and we remember it better because our sort of survival instincts tell us to absorb bad news and think about it. But certainly, I could now almost recommend doing a tour of Ukrainian gas station restaurants.
Tell us about your favorite thing to eat at a Ukrainian gas station.
Okay. Well, sort of on a drive-through, it's the famous Wog Dog, which exists in different brands as well. But certainly the Canadian Forces are very keen on wog dogs when they're in Ukraine, and
So are our tourists.
and they're a thing. But the kind of better brand of Ukrainian gas station has restaurants in it with things like salmon cream soup and various Italian tortellini and other sort of specialties, plus vareniki. Frankly, it is now nicer to stop at that kind of gas station than at one of the sort of fast food oriented plazas here in Canada. I think we could actually learn a bit from these Ukrainian operators. They kind of leapfrogged, and that's the other thing about Ukraine being a latecomer in certain respects, is that they're able to pick up on other people's mistakes,
yes,
or to adopt newer technologies quicker.
Yes.
Mobile is one example where you have generally good service, and of course you can't beat Ukraine on price for mobile and data, as I'm discovering as I readapt to Canadian cell phone tariffs. But anyway,
yeah, that's true. Well, our tourists love the wog dog and are just blown away. They go into the gas station, and we get our guides to sort of, oh, there you go. There's a picture of some of our tourists coming out of a gas station with all kinds of treats. But they can't believe you can get, like you said, nice food and some vodka and some interesting chocolates and beer, and they get on the bus, and then we party till we get to the next city. But when you said Lviv is being a little bit overwhelmed, perhaps too many tourists. Meanwhile, other centers like Uzhhorod or Chernivtsi or even Brode would love to have some of that spillover. Yes. How do you think that will proceed?
Well, I think what's happening is that local civil society activists have realized that economic development for many of these areas depends a lot on tourism, and that you don't want tourism to happen to you. You and your community want to define the terms on which tourism comes to your area. I think the Carpathians are among the first to have realized this. And a number of the people I met when they were, either local activists or had just set up the tourism board, are running in the municipal elections this year on a platform of let's be strategic about tourism. Let's rebrand. Let's not sell out our town, but sell our town on our terms to paying visitors. And I think,
go ahead.
I've seen that in terms of the Verkhovena area in the Carpathians.
Yes.
I've seen it in Buchach in the southern end of Ternopil Oblast.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does require a kind of shift in the mindset. I mean, we've been talking about what stereotypes we might have.
Right.
I think it's important for local mayors and others to realize that they have something that other people want to see, because a lot of them are so used to being in their local ambiance that they really don't understand what could be interesting about it to other people.
I found that when we first started doing tours to Ukraine, I had a hard time with my team in Lviv convincing them that, yes, this really would be interesting to Canadians to see. For example, I know you had a picture of a beautiful cow in sort of an eco-tourist project near Brode.
Brode, yeah.
I would have had to struggle to get my staff to take tourists there, but now they've realized how interesting this type of stuff is to Canadians. Tell us about this lovely cow and what she's done.
Yes, this is a new family dairy farm in Zabolotsi. It's actually part of a Canadian project to basically take people from the 1 or 2 cow at home thing, which is economically unsustainable and takes up a whole lot of their time, to having smaller groups of people who turn family farms into small businesses. But at the same time, they often add an ecotourism aspect to it. And they're organizing co-ops. And then the people who know themselves for their co-ops develop the kind of social trust that then makes people from the co-ops get elected to municipal office and then they're able to really develop the community further. And so it's a virtuous sort of loop.
Yeah,
And I think Canadians should feel proud that they've helped start the loop, but it's really
that's
Ukrainians that are running with it, especially women, uh,
really.
who, well, I mean, women traditionally in Ukraine were the people who looked after livestock.
Mm-hmm.
So they're interested in spending less time in their day if they can get a milking machine, et cetera, et cetera. Although that's what
Right.
when guys start taking an interest, when there are gadgets involved, that's when the man around the house starts taking an interest. Um, and they, I think, understand the value of working together.
Yeah.
So, and that you can leverage, whether it's the price of milk, whether it's promoting an area as a tourism attraction by working together, by having a common platform, you
Mm-hmm.
can make more money, you can increase your reach. And, you know, we also were working in a different project through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities with Yaremcha in the Carpathians
Yes.
to help bring hotel owners together so that they literally don't spoil the water for each other, you know, by for example, coordinating what you do about water supply, about sewage, et cetera, to make sure that everyone can have an eco-friendly, pleasant experience.
The
There
concept that a
are,
high tide raises all ships, it
yeah,
wasn't natural to Ukrainians. It has to be, they used to be a little bit more competitive amongst each
yeah,
other, but collaborative work.
and so we helped set up a sort of a hoteliers association for
Mm-hmm.
Yaremcha. I think there are about 200 hotels in the area and
Yeah.
600 sort of agroturismo room rental people. They
Oh,
pick
wow.
up a lot of traffic from Crimea, which no longer is available to Ukrainians. Uh, so in places like that, uh, again, and this is for both Ukrainians and for people from outside, you got to shift your mindset. The problem is one of managing growth. It's
Yes.
not one of, oh my God, our country's falling apart, which is the standard moaning Ukrainian narrative. It's how do you manage growth in a way that people still get what they're coming for, which is a nice mountain experience.
And with this idea about the Bucic example and the Yaremcha example, and people sort of coming to terms with the fact that they can have everything they want at home in Ukraine without the cost of traveling to Europe, they're also realizing maybe they themselves don't have to travel to Europe to work, which they have historically gone to
Right.
Poland, gone to Italy, gone to
Exactly.
Portugal.
It's job creation
Yeah.
and keeps families together. So less social disruption. And people notice these things. We had Canadian election observers, and we've had hundreds of them, of course,
Mm-hmm.
come through. And one I remember last year was a Jordanian Canadian
Okay.
who went to Sarne, which is in Volyn. And
Okay.
he ended up staying at a very nice boutique hotel that somebody had opened up in Sarne while he was doing his observing and saying, I'm going to tell all my friends, like, this is like Europe, only affordable.
Right.
In
Right.
fact, it is Europe, obviously, and it is affordable. Uh, and I think, you know, people who manage to find that sweet spot are keep doing well. There's our Canadian, actually neighbor originating from here in Bloor West Village, Roman Tatarski, who
Yeah.
owns two
In on the
sort of
square.
on the square, and then the Danilo Inn, and is now, I guess, in
Yeah.
the process of opening a hotel in Kyiv.
Yeah, he's done
Uh,
very well. He's great. Great places.
but you know, he understood that people don't necessarily want either super posh 5-star
Right.
or bare bones Soviet relic,
Yeah.
but that a kind of well priced, well run 3-star accommodation at a
Yeah.
reasonable at a reasonable rate will get you far. And so he's done very well.
Absolutely. So, what do you think Ukraine could learn from some of its neighboring countries? I noticed we talked about Estonia and how they've really embraced their authentic traditional culture. Is there something that
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine can learn from places like Estonia and other neighboring countries?
Well, I think I think what you can learn and what Ukrainians have been learning is that you can combine tradition and cutting edge progress. I mean, the fact that Estonians can get together in their tens of thousands and sing folk songs doesn't prevent them from being the most connected people in the world when it comes to governance and inventing things like Skype. And I think what you're seeing develop in Ukraine, and it's especially, I think, evident in places like Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk and even Kolomea, is a kind of Ukrainian version of what the Bavarians call laptops and lederhosen. In other words, you can be very committed to preserving valued elements of your traditional culture while you are also cutting edge in terms of technology. And for Ukrainian techies, living in places that are architecturally interesting, plus within easy driving or cycling range of the Carpathians,
yes,
is a very attractive overall value proposition. In fact, you don't have a lot of emigrating Ukrainian IT people because their life there is good.
Quite well. Yeah.
And
Ivano-Frankivsk is really emerging. We know Lviv has become a tech place. Ivano-Frankivsk is emerging, and you mentioned even Kolomea has a little tech hub.
A little tech cluster. I mean, Ivano-Frankivsk to me would have to be sort of one of the most improved cities in Ukraine over the years that I've known it, which is since about the early 90s. It used to be a bit of a drive-through place on the way to the Carpathians, right, and kind of unimpressive visually. And again, in large part through engagement by the local business community, by people with a kind of, business improvement area mindset. I mean, I happen to be talking to you from where Canada's and the world's first BIA was set up, which is Bloor West in 1971. The Teple Misto sort of movement, the warm city movement in Ivano-Frankivsk is very similar. They started off by getting a new look for downtown, and then setting up social enterprise places where people could congregate. And now they're redoing a big industrial plant as a tech innovation and entertainment and hospitality hub. So again, it's the kind of thing where, on the one hand, it's got all the kind of coolness of a place in Berlin or a loft in some Canadian city, but with the local cultural elements that make it distinctive.
And Ukrainians love to be close to family, and they like to be able to get together with family and have those big meals and do all those typical Ukrainian stuff. And if they're off to work and somewhere else in Europe, they lose that. They get disconnected, and they don't want to do that. So
yeah, and so I think also coming back to other regions of Ukraine, Ukraine's got unexpected legacies like herds of zebras and antelopes and Chevalski horses.
Let's look at these zebras. Right now, zebras isn't something you'd expect to see in Ukraine at all. Where are these guys? I mean, they're not downtown Lviv. Where are they wandering?
They are not. They are in the northern end of Kherson Oblast, so closer to the Black Sea. There is a huge biosphere reservation. Called Askania Nova. It was set up actually by a German baron named Baron Pfalz-Fein in the late 19th century. He was very interested in exotic animals and seeing if he could adapt them to life in the steppes of southern Ukraine. And so you've got, this is literally close to 100 square kilometers of preserved steppe land.
Wow.
With large herds of animals. You basically, when you visit, you go on a sort of safari. And one of the other animals they have there is the Chevalski horse, which is a kind of prehistoric horse. That was originally in Mongolia and came through the big migrations in the Eurasian steppe, and it actually had died out in Mongolia itself, and so it's this biosphere reserve in Ukraine from which the horse was reintroduced into the wild in Mongolia.
Wow, that's fascinating. How about that?
So yeah, I mean, it's just and I'm not sure if he's still the director. It was certainly when we visited about 2.5 years ago. This guy, larger than life director. He's a wildlife photographer, nature conservationist, who loves telling tall tales about what is really sort of a really unique natural habitat that you wouldn't expect to have in Central and Eastern Europe.
Now, so many of our tourists are Ukrainian heritage tourists, people that want to go back to visit the land of their ancestors. So, they generally tend to see Kiev and Western Ukraine a little bit. But as we're kind of alluding to, there is so much more to Ukraine than just that. Ukraine is a destination of its own worth visiting. We talked earlier, before the broadcast, we chatted about castles in Ukraine and some of the Cossack palaces of
in the States,
yeah.
Sort of a real kind of discovery for me was actually northern Ukraine. Don't hear a lot about northern Ukraine. So that was north of Kyiv, Chernihiv Oblast, Sumy, where you have towns like Baturin, which was Mazepa's capital, or Hluchiv, more hetmans over there. But also Rozumovsky as a hetman and the churches he built, which are on the highway to Chernihiv. And Chernihiv, which actually has more medieval Kievan Rus churches than Kyiv itself.
Wow.
And many of which have now been quite nicely preserved. So there's also, I'd say, a place very much worth visiting, which is Pereyaslav Khmelnytsky. It's about an hour southeast of Kyiv on the left bank of the Dnipro. And it has an amazing open-air museum. Now, Kyiv does as well, but that includes all the regions of Ukraine. The one in Pereyaslav is just central Ukraine. So it's kind of like walking into a real live Shevchenko poem.
Wow.
And it's only an hour away from the city, and it's in a way it's literally, well, maybe not literally, but pretty much the equivalent of Upper Canada Village in Morrisburg here in Ontario, in the sense that most of the buildings there were saved from flooding during the construction of the big Dnipro River hydro projects, in the same way as the St. Lawrence Seaway meant that there was then an urge to preserve some of the buildings next to it in Morrisburg. So there was a very, I think his name was Sikorsky, a museum guy who was really active in the Soviet period and managed to persuade people to move old buildings, old churches, things to this park. And he created many other museums. There's a Skovoroda museum. There's a museum of where Shevchenko's, if I'm not mistaken, Zapovit was written. So a relatively small town, but with lots of stuff to see. Poltava region, again, these are the traditionally highly Ukrainian regions, but they're just not sort of source regions for migration to Canada. The museum in Poltava, which is like this fantasy of Ukrainian folk design gone art nouveau gone modern.
Is that the Battle of Poltava?
Oh, there's the Battle of Poltava on the outskirts, but there's the folk museum downtown, built by the architect Chevalski, which is this like amazing sort of Ukrainian art nouveau modernism based on folk patterns. There's Opishnya, which is the ceramics center, pottery center. There's Dikhanka, all the sort of the Gogolesque places of Poltava region.
Is that Opishnya, has it been protected by UNESCO? I know the Kostyov ceramics of the Carpathian Mountains have.
Opishny, I'm not sure if it has, but it has several ceramics museums, open air, others. So there's lots to see. The roads in Poltava Oblast could use with a bit of improvement. That's one thing. Roads in Western Ukraine have been amazingly improved. Yes. Central Ukraine, still needs work. And I think that's one of the things that, of course, means that, think of it as part of an adventure. Think of, we need 4-wheel drive to get to some of these places.
Well, we've gone to Kanyv by boat and to Kanyv by road. And the boat ride is lovely because you go from downtown Kiev right to Kanyv. You can enjoy the museum and relax on the way there and back. But the drive is a little bit stressful unless you can stop for a walk dog along the way. And
well, and then the drive down the left bank is maybe less scenic, but less stressful as well than trying the right bank routes there. But even on the way from Kanyv to Kiev on the right bank, okay, you can visit some of the sites of Tripilla, where the original sort of museums with archaeological evidence of the Tripillian culture are found. So there's
the world doesn't know much about as well, and archaeological tourism is becoming a thing. What other categories of tourism do you think Ukraine should focus on?
Well, I mean, there's one I think that's already happening informally, and that's dental tourism.
I know, I did get my tooth done over there.
And Ukraine now has a range of clinics that have Swiss trained, Western European trained people providing advantageous rates when it comes to major dental work. I'd say as well, there's spa tourism. Now, there it depends whether you end up in sort of contemporary wellness or Soviet era sanatorium or some combination thereof. So it depends what you're looking for, but there's a range of options now out there. Obviously cultural tourism, also different heritage. Obviously you've had tours for the past 30 odd years for Canadians of Mennonite background into southeast Ukraine, which is where the main areas of Mennonite settlement.
Out of Winnipeg, nonetheless, there's a large settlement of Mennonites that came from Ukraine, and they're making their way back.
So I spent 5 days with the Mennonite Center in Ukraine, people at the Faith and Life Choir of Manitoba, doing the rounds of communities in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Obviously, for Canadians of Jewish background, there are memorial sites, some of which are now being better marked, better developed. I mean, that's obviously on the one hand, a history of 1,000 years of living together, but also tragic breaks in that, especially in the 20th century. So Ukrainians need to do better in memorializing cultures other than themselves.
Absolutely,
in Ukraine. And I think there's a very useful initiative being done by the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, which is to support rayon level local museums in Western Ukraine in creating Jewish displays about Jewish communities that lived in their individual regions. I think that would be very helpful.
For example, is very known for its Jewish quarter, and it's a very popular place to go visit, to experience a little bit of, not the tragic parts of the Jewish history, but celebrate some of the positive parts. But all throughout Ukraine, Jewish culture was very prevalent until World War II.
And I think as we've seen this year with some of the events around both Israeli and Canadian governments trying to control pilgrimage to Uman, for followers of that Hasidic sect. Hasidism largely emerged in Ukraine.
Yes, actually, it did.
It's the homeland of Hasidism.
Many Jewish pilgrimage sites throughout Ukraine, and in fact, the father of Hasidism was born just outside of Kosyov in the village of Babin, which is it's a Hutzel it's a very typical Hutzel region where people are very surprised to find
Mhm.
that out. How integrated the cultures were, not just the Jewish people, but the Armenians and the Austrians. You know, Ukraine, Lviv, Kiev, they're all very multicultural. Odessa is so multicultural, and
Yeah.
that's a big surprise to a lot of people.
It is, and I think the important thing is, and maybe coming back to your unhappy camper in Odessa on linguistic grounds, is that what's important also, and something Ukrainians need to work on, is that Ukrainian speakers should not be looked down on in Ukraine,
Ukrainian,
wherever they are.
right? Yeah.
And that, that's something that I would have to occasionally explain to service providers, even in Kyiv, that the person from Canada talking to them genuinely did not understand them if they were speaking Russian.
Right. Yeah.
Because to them, they switch between them.
Yeah.
Easily, and it never even enters their kind of way of thinking that someone who understands one does not understand the other.
Because if you grew up with it, you can easily switch back and forth. The news, cartoons, music was in Russian, and you could flip back and forth between Ukrainian and Russian. But for a Canadian, Russian is very foreign.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't got an ear for it. I mean, partly, I guess it's the equivalent would be in some of these north end of Winnipeg or other parts of Canadian cities where people used to be able to switch between Polish and Ukrainian easily.
Yes. Yeah.
But someone from Poltava would not be getting this,
right?
Or Odessa. Yeah. So, but again, these are reflexes that that Ukrainian tourism and hospitality providers need to also work on.
And I've had to do the opposite with my people, is explain the historical presence of Russian and why, you don't need to get mad at the poor waiter from some village in Poltava who came to Kiev for got a summer job at a restaurant because he doesn't speak Ukrainian naturally. It's not his fault.
But on the other hand, guy from Poltava, village in Poltava, who probably did speak Ukrainian, then figured, I'm going to become super cool and hip by speaking Russian, should realize, if I've spoken to Ukrainian, I should probably respond in Ukrainian too, because that's the hospitable, customer service oriented way of doing things. So I think everyone is learning, and everyone's sort of figuring out ways of getting along. And besides which, of course, people have increasingly better levels of English. So very interesting. And this goes outside the heritage tourism ambit. Some of the most positive feedback I've had about travel in Ukraine comes from people from Quebecois, from others with zero cultural connections and therefore zero expectations, cliches, and who have traveled by car, various other ways across Ukraine, no language skills, sign language plus whatever they've got. They've loved it. They found people are very naturally helpful. Mm-hmm. They value the fact, especially in smaller towns, that somebody is taking an interest in coming to see them and their place, and will go out of their way to be friendly, hospitable, show you where to go, help you get fed, that sort of thing. I don't know if you or others have read the writings of a guy who writes under the travel blog moniker of Barbecue Boy.
No.
So he's actually a Montrealer, and he and his wife are professional travelers.
Okay.
They've been on the road, I think, for 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's written a guide to Lviv and to Kyiv, but they found that Lviv was their maybe favorite city in all of Europe.
We hear that a lot,
for long stays. So their way of traveling is to go for about 30 days.
Yes.
Rent an apartment and sort of live semi-locally.
Yes.
And they've done Lviv 2 years in a row. They love it.
Lviv is a very livable place. Absolutely. We get lots of people that have said they would like to retire to Lviv, and other people say, why would you want to live in Ukraine? And once you've gone there and walked around a little bit, you realize like, there's sort of a lightness about life in the view that you can't find anywhere else.
So I think sort of for people with a heritage connection, there's a need occasionally to let go of some of the framings you got.
Right.
And maybe again, I think actually, buying a copy of Oilo Hercules' Summer Kitchen, apart from being helpful in recipe terms, also gives you a range of real life experiences from around the country.
Yeah.
And to sort of go with that, go with the spirit of inquiry, go with the spirit of let's look at new things. Let's not just try and either confirm or disprove something I was told when I was 12.
Right.
There's a lot more out there in the country to experience.
You would go to Italy or Greece without any preconceived expectations. You would just enjoy the culture, or Mexico or wherever you want to go in the world. But for some reason with Ukraine, at least for heritage Ukrainians, we go, like you said, armed and ready to argue.
Well, and I think people there go like, вони приїжджають і тільки хочуть вчити нас жити. They come and they sort of want to teach us how to live. Now, yes. Partly it's because people who have devoted large parts of their lives to volunteering for things, and therefore sense that, and understandably so. And maybe, for all we know, maybe Canadians of Sicilian background go nuts when they go to Sicily, and there's something that drives them crazy about it too. So, whereas we just enjoy it.
Yeah, that's very true. It probably is very true. But I think nevertheless, there's so much to see in Ukraine. I had the lucky opportunity to bump into you in several parts of Ukraine. We bumped into each other once in Kiev at a gala performance, once in Lviv at the International Ukrainian Dance and Culture Festival.
With the Kubasonics.
With the Kubasonics, who are now in Newfoundland. But one of my favorite times I bumped into you and your wife was in the Carpathian Mountains on a special occasion. It was Ukrainian Christmas Day. And there we are. And it was in Krivorivnya, the church in Krivorivnya, right after the presentation of the Trembitas. And I was with a group of tourists, and there we were. We bumped into each other, and our group was very happy to say, oh, we met the Canadian ambassador to Ukraine in the Carpathian Mountains on a cold winter day. And you were wearing a very special shirt that day.
I was.
Yeah.
It's one I got from a Lviv company called Folk Art that was a sort of a maple leaf meets Ukrainian embroidery or Baroque embroidery shirt. And I was proud to open up my jacket to you guys.
Now that event has become a special event for me to go to listen to the Trembitas playing, and that is very much in sort of people's idea of the romantic Carpathian Mountains.
Yeah.
But not a lot of Canadians came from the Carpathian Mountains. The Hutsul people. Most people came from Bukovina or Ternopil or Lviv or
Pokutya.
Yeah.
Maybe some boykwas. True enough, although I guess my family partly are from Hutsulshtina as well. Bieloslavia, but a bit downhill from Bukovina.
A little bit down the mountain.
Maybe they don't consider them authentic Hutsuls. They're not high enough in the mountains. But yeah, I mean, in Krivorivnya, you sort of got life imitating art, imitating life. The parish priest there, who's a charismatic figure, I guess is very aware of the fact that this is the exact church where the events in Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors
were filmed.
Happened.
Yeah,
and filmed, and also where the story happened. And so we spent part of Christmas Eve with him and his family.
Mm-hmm.
And they had just recently welcomed a pair of twins into their family, whom they named Ivan and Marichka.
Ah,
so literally the names of the two characters in Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. So that is kind of freaky. And it goes to show that sometimes, you're prepared to be disappointed that stuff isn't like legend suggests, but sometimes it's even more so, or more alive than you might have expected.
And Krivorivnya is such an interesting village because actually Ivan Franko and Hrushevsky and Lesya Ukrainka, these people would come and spend time there relaxing, breathing the fresh air, and also doing a lot of writing and learning about the traditions of Ukraine that became part of romantic images of what we
and literature. Yeah. So and Kotyubinsky then as well for Tini Zabutych Predkів. So yeah, there's lots to experience, many kilos to put on if you're not careful, in terms of the generous hospitality and food.
Yes.
I think helped along now by the fact that there is this kind of interest in reviving very local forms of food. And whereas before it would have just kind of been there because people made it, now people are careful to preserve and reproduce it in a way that can be served to tourists and people can enjoy it.
Here, these look like a halushke. This is a photo you sent to us. Is that halushke?
No, those are actually vareniki as interpreted in Cherkasy and Poltava.
Really? Okay.
So they're kind of sort of airy, slightly dim sum versions, steamed vareniki, that are characteristic of those regions. And if you think about, again, whether you want to pronounce them Gogol or Hohol, the story about vareniki leaping into the mouth.
Because they float.
They float. Well, so it's much easier to believe that these puffy vareniki can float than your Western Ukrainian varenik, which would more like slither along in butter. These guys have a chance of floating.
Yeah.
And we had them. These were served at a kind of eco resort, sort of agriturismo resort near Dikanka, in Poltava region.
You can stay in these old houses that have been redone to be like mini hotel huts.
Yeah.
You can sleep on the if you want.
We didn't go for that option. Okay. We went for the mattress option. But yeah, there's a whole wealth of these, again, different takes on regional takes on traditional foods that you can learn about and you can personally internalize them.
Most of our tours, when we first started in 2011, taking people to Ukraine, was Western Ukraine and Kyiv, and occasionally Odessa. But now we are trying to, offer more options, especially if someone's come once, they've seen what they thought they wanted to see, and then they learn about that there's so much more. So we have a tour that takes people from Kyiv down through Poltava, Zaporizhia, and Odessa, sort of a central Ukrainian experience, and that's become quite popular. Like you said, the roads aren't great, but there's so much to discover in that part of Ukraine, which is just starting to come out in the Ukrainian community, and hopefully beyond. Go ahead, please.
And one of the things you realize is that a lot of the things that are sort of iconic about Ukrainian culture actually happened there.
Yes.
They didn't happen in Ternopil, etc. They happened there.
I think perhaps the aversion to the Russian language, the conflict in the Far East, to sort of stall that curiosity
Yeah.
to get there. But
And
we'll
I
get there.
think maybe a bit less of a tradition of private initiative in doing things like building hotels, cafes. I mean, but that's rapidly changing. There are these very impressive ladies who started off a roadside first refreshment stand called Tre Sestre on the way to Kharkiv, near
Okay.
Lochvitsa, Poltava region. And they've now parlayed that into a big roadside restaurant, focusing very much on traditional food of the region. And I think they've got two in Kyiv. So that they've built a little restaurant empire, starting off basically with a roadside refreshment stand. So that's the kind of entrepreneurialism that is making a difference in those regions now.
So speaking of entrepreneurialism, that is a bit, maybe a little bit edgier, a little bit controversial. Some people are anxious about the idea of Chernobyl being a tourist destination. And I had the lucky opportunity to go and do a day trip to Pripyat and see the area. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. But yet, some people are more reserved on that front. Have you had a chance to get out there yourself?
I did, but mostly on business because of Canada's contributions to the Chernobyl containment structure, which is, of course, I think the world's largest formerly movable structure. Your tax dollars at work, and various other meetings regarding the remediation of the area. But yeah, I mean, the city of Pripyat is like this spooky Planet of the Apes kind of experience of how it makes you think about how quickly nature takes over if there are no humans standing in its way. It's almost kind of scary. It's like nature isn't necessarily always our friend, or not terribly motherly, even, I'd say. But definitely fascinating to look at with the right tour leadership and the right precautions given the zone. And the other thing is, it's become kind of an area where lots of animals that previously had been hunted to extinction have come back.
Yes.
Wolves, bears, again, elk. The absence of humans, elk, have come in there. So, and now I think one of the last pre-2019 environment ministers had this good idea of opening up parts of the zone for redevelopment as solar power generating locations, because you've got a lot of electrical connections for historical reasons
and empty land,
and if you can connect up safe solar power, then you can kind of repurpose parts of the zone, and it doesn't really scare the wolves or the elk either.
Right. Well, when we went, we had a Geiger counter the whole time, and so they showed us where it was safe and where it was not safe, and I felt very comfortable with the way they had preserved. You go through military checkpoints. It's not. You're not willy-nilly wandering around in the bush.
None of that.
And I thought it was very important for people to learn about this tragedy, so that, like the stereotypical saying is that we don't repeat history. If we don't learn about it, we may repeat it. And so that rings true for me there.
Yeah. And then, we are also partly not only what we eat, but what we wear. I know you're obviously very much a cobblestone freeway kind of guy.
Yes.
I'm wearing the sweatshirt I got from Ukrainer, who are a bunch of Ukrainians who do videos about the country. But the founder, interestingly, was a guy who started off as a Ukrainian Southeast Asia travel blogger.
Right.
That came back in 2014 and said, well, what if I exhibited the same curiosity about my own country? And so they've done, I think, dozens, if not hundreds of hours of really interesting stuff that people can find on YouTube.
They're fantastic. I highly recommend them.
Yeah. And And so what you can think of when you're going, and certainly I hope that next year things will be way more open than they have been this year, is that you're not just exploring for yourself, but you're kind of joining Ukrainians as they have another look,
country,
sort of relook at their own country.
Well,
which makes
speaking
it
of which,
doubly
today,
interesting.
yes, yeah, it is good. Many of our staff in Ukraine, when they joined our team, they said they traveled with me to parts of Ukraine that they had never been to before. So, that was kind of fun. But we're almost out of time. So I just want to kind of get to the point where we mentioned that today, ironically, Ukraine announced the reopening of its borders. So this is a very positive step in tourism picking up again. And we know that many people depend on tourism for their livelihoods, for their income, to be able to eat and clothe and feed their families. So this is a very positive step. September 28th, the borders have reopened to Ukraine. And I think this next year, we'll start to see a resurgence in tourism. Do you agree?
I would certainly hope so. And we managed to slip in one quick visit in January, just before the COVID boom came down, with a choir here from Toronto, sort of a kollada tour of the usual suspects in Western Ukraine, Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk. Very enjoyable. And we're hoping to get back as well.
Well, that'll be wonderful. Well, I truly hope that we'll bump into you at some other randomly and unique, interesting location in Ukraine, if not at one of the Ukrainian festivals here in Canada. And
look for me behind the third zebra on the left.
The third zebra on the left. Well, thank you for drawing our attention to some of these unique locations in Ukraine that even I wasn't aware of. And I know I've been to Ukraine many times. And people say, Vince, why do you go to Ukraine so many times? There's so many other places. Yes, every time I go, I learn something new. Every time I go, I see something interesting. And learning about Ukraine actually inspired me to learn more about Romania and Belarus and Poland and Hungary, because, in every place you go, there's overlapping cultural relevance. And that's very exciting.
For sure. And of course, before coming to Ukraine this last time, we spent 3 years in Belgrade and then Montenegro and some of that area. So definitely, you can see the whole kind of Central and Southeast Europe, the Slavic world. It's fun to compare what's the same, what's different, music, food, traditions, homebrew, whatever.
Well, I know lots of students, my brother included, he went to France for his spring break trip, and lots of schools go to Italy. And I think hopefully in the future, we'll get school groups from across Canada going to visit Ukraine and learning about the place where their ancestors came from, and also just a really interesting, historically important country. So, дуже дякую.
Прошу дуже.
Thank you very much. Roman Waschuk, former ambassador from Canada to Ukraine, was with us this hour. And we thank you very much. And we hope to see you again soon.
See ya.